For years, governments watched Bitcoin from a distance, treating it like an unpredictable force that didn't fit into the familiar machinery of global finance. But something changed. Quietly, without announcements or fireworks, institutions and states began to appear on the other side of the market, not as critics, but as buyers. The moment felt subtle, almost invisible, yet its meaning echoed far beyond price charts. It marked a shift in the relationship between individuals and the systems that once ignored this strange digital asset. When a government decides to buy Bitcoin, it's not chasing a trend. It's acknowledging a truth it can no longer dismiss, that the world has entered a new era where value doesn't need permission to exist. Nations have always depended on control, of currency, of debt, of financial direction. But Bitcoin is a network that refuses to bend to authority, and that contradiction created a tension that lasted more than a decade. Now that tension is breaking. Governments are not just watching Bitcoin, they're stepping inside it. This change didn't begin with headlines. It began with budgets under pressure, with inflation creeping like a shadow across entire populations, with leaders realizing that money built on promises may not survive the storms ahead. Bitcoin, with its quiet, predictable rhythm, offered something rare, a foundation that couldn't be printed, paused, or redirected. As governments searched for something stable, they found value in the very thing they once questioned. But this shift brings an unexpected twist, because Bitcoin was never designed for governments first. It was designed for individuals. For people who hold 0.02 BTC, or even less, the network treats every Satoshi the same. No central wallet receives special privileges. No authority can rewrite the rules. Bitcoin's neutrality is its most powerful feature, and as states begin to accumulate it, the contrast becomes even clearer. The network does not change for them. There's something almost poetic in this moment. For years, individuals explored Bitcoin like travelers entering unknown territory. Early adopters building, mining, learning, trusting. Governments, meanwhile, stayed behind the border, waiting for certainty. But now the paths are crossing. Those who came early are no longer the ones approaching power. Power is approaching them. And that changes how people look at their own small holdings. When a government enters Bitcoin, it alters the narrative that once surrounded the asset. It becomes harder to dismiss, harder to mock, harder to ignore. Institutions shape perception, and with perception comes adoption. The presence of states signals something simple yet profound. Bitcoin is no longer an experiment on the edges of finance. It is becoming part of the architecture. And when something enters the architecture, it becomes foundational. For someone holding 0.02 BTC, this shift might feel distant. But it's closer than it seems. Because Bitcoin's design compresses the world into a single shared system. There is no small holder or large holder. There are only participants. As governments accumulate, they don't diminish the meaning of your share. They underline it. Every Satoshi becomes a piece of an asset now acknowledged at the highest levels of global decision-making. And here lies the irony. The more governments buy, the more Bitcoin behaves as it was intended. Not as a tool of power, but as a counterbalance to it. The presence of states inside the network doesn't weaken its purpose. It strengthens it. Bitcoin becomes a mirror that reflects the changing world. A world where individuals and institutions stand side by side under the same rules, the same supply, the same irreversible math. The early chapters of Bitcoin's story were about resistance. Now the story is shifting to recognition. Governments are not adopting Bitcoin out of ideology, but out of necessity. And necessity is always more powerful than belief. When states begin to rely on something, it moves from possibility to inevitability. That inevitability is the landscape surrounding your 0.02 BTC. As this new reality forms, a quiet question arises. What does it mean when the most powerful entities on the planet join the network that was created to decentralize power? The answer is still unfolding. But one thing is clear. Your position inside this story is no longer small. It's part of a shift that reaches far beyond screens and markets. into the philosophy of value itself. As governments stepped into the market, the structure of Bitcoin began revealing its deeper layers. For many years, the network felt like a frontier, a place where individuals, builders, and early believers shaped its meaning through experimentation and courage. But with states becoming participants, the environment changed. Suddenly, Bitcoin wasn't only a space of innovation. It became a stage where the world's strongest institutions quietly repositioned themselves for the future. And that shift invited individuals to rethink their own strategies. The most important lesson emerging from this moment is simple. Bitcoin rewards those who understand time. Not speed, not trends, not noise, but time. Governments accumulate BTC not because they hope it will double next month, but because they see decades ahead. They understand that in a world of rising debt and shrinking trust, assets with fixed rules become anchors. And if the most powerful actors on the planet are thinking in decades, then your 0.02 BTC becomes part of a long horizon you may not have noticed before. This is where personal discipline enters the story. Bitcoin was always a test of patience, a reminder that strong systems grow block by block, not in explosions. When governments buy, the temptation is to react impulsively, to overthink, to chase, to fear missing out. But the truth is quieter. Institutions entering the network do not reduce individual opportunity. They amplify it. They validate the path you were already on. The strategy now is not to compete with them, but to align with the rhythm of something that's becoming global infrastructure. As this shift unfolds, transparency becomes your advantage. Governments operate slowly, often behind layers of bureaucracy and delay. Bitcoin, in contrast, reveals everything in real time. Every issuance, every block, every rule. Nothing is hidden from the smallest participant. When you hold 0.02 BTC, you have the same access to the system's heartbeat as any giant institution. That symmetry is unprecedented in the history of money. Turns observation into strategy. And so individuals begin to think differently. Instead of asking, "Will my small amount matter?" they start asking, "What does my position mean in a world where Bitcoin is becoming a reserve asset?" The difference is subtle but transformative. Value is no longer measured only by quantity. It's measured by placement, by being early enough to stand alongside states as they enter a new monetary era. This perspective shifts Bitcoin from speculation to participation. Meanwhile, the narrative around ownership is evolving. Governments accumulating BTC suggests something profound. They no longer believe a purely fiat future is sustainable. And if states diversify to protect themselves, individuals naturally follow. But individuals have an edge governments never will: flexibility. You can adapt faster, respond sooner, learn continuously. Your decisions aren't trapped inside committees. This is where personal strategy becomes powerful. A quiet realization spreads among those paying attention. The more Bitcoin integrates into the world, the more essential self-custody becomes. When governments buy, centralization pressure grows naturally. Exchanges feel the influence. Platforms feel the weight of regulation. But your 0.02 BTC, held independently, becomes a symbol of something rare: value outside the reach of political preference. A piece of the network that answers only to the rules coded into it. This is where growth turns inward. People begin to see Bitcoin not as a tool for profit but as a teacher of structure, discipline, and clarity. The same qualities that make it appealing to states, transparency, scarcity, immutability, become lessons for individuals. You start to notice how often noise affects your decisions. How often fear or excitement blinds clarity. Bitcoin becomes a reflection, a system that rewards those who treat long-term thinking as a practice. Governments entering the space doesn't mean Bitcoin is becoming centralized. It means the world is moving toward it. And in that movement, individuals gain something unexpected: leverage. Not financial leverage, but philosophical leverage. The understanding that being early isn't about being lucky. It's about recognizing value before it becomes obvious. Holding 0.02 BTC in this environment isn't a small act. It's a declaration of alignment with a new financial architecture. As the global landscape shifts, the strategy for individuals becomes clear. Hold with purpose. Learn with patience. Act with discipline. When institutions accumulate for decades, your role isn't to predict the next month. It's to understand the next chapter. And that chapter is already being written, block by block, in a system where your place is just as real as theirs. As governments continued to accumulate Bitcoin, a quiet clarity began spreading among those who paid attention. It became obvious that this wasn't just another financial trend or political gesture. It was a sign that the old monetary world was entering a phase of profound redefinition. And in that redefinition, individuals found a rare kind of freedom, the freedom to understand their place in a system that no longer belonged to a single authority. Bitcoin was becoming a mirror, reflecting not only what nations valued, but what individuals were learning to value in themselves. Over time, the narrative shifted away from fear, excitement, or speculation. The story matured. Bitcoin became something stable in an unstable world, not because prices stopped moving, but because its rules never changed. This consistency revealed something essential. Strength doesn't require permission. It only requires alignment with truth. And the truth emerging from the network was simple. Scarcity, transparency, and decentralization create a foundation stronger than belief alone. They create conviction. As this understanding deepened, people began to re-examine what ownership really meant. Holding Bitcoin wasn't just a financial choice. It was an internal practice, a way of stepping out of dependency and toward responsibility. Your 0.02 BTC wasn't just a number on a screen. It was a commitment to a different rhythm, a slower and more thoughtful approach to value. It taught patience in a culture built on urgency. It taught restraint in a world trained to overreact. It reminded people that what grows slowly often lasts the longest. The presence of governments didn't weaken this lesson. It strengthened it. Because even as institutions entered the network, they entered under the same rules as everyone else. There were no shortcuts, no special privileges, no alternative pathways. In a world where power normally redraws the boundaries, Bitcoin held the line. It treated the largest governments and the smallest holders as equals. And in that equality, many found a kind of dignity that traditional financial systems rarely offer. People began to notice how this equality changed them internally. It created a sense of calm independence, the understanding that even small ownership held meaning, not because of its size, but because of what it represented. Alignment with a future being built from the ground up. A future where individuals participate not through permission, but through presence. In this world, your 0.02 BTC was not a fragment. It was a voice. And every voice contributed to the stability of the whole. As the relationship between states and Bitcoin evolved, individuals discovered something else. Decentralization wasn't just a feature of the network, it was a philosophy for life. It encouraged people to distribute their trust, their decisions, their hopes across systems that didn't depend on a single point of failure. It reminded them to build resilience rather than rely on promises. And in doing so, it shifted the center of gravity from institutions to individuals. Quietly, steadily, block by block. What emerged from this shift was a kind of inner sovereignty. Not rebellion, not defiance, but a grounded sense of self-direction. The world around you could change. Governments could buy. Markets could rise and fall. But your understanding remained stable because it was built on rules that did not bend. Bitcoin became a compass in a landscape where traditional markers were fading. It helped people navigate uncertainty by anchoring them to something predictable. And ultimately, this journey revealed the deepest truth of all. Bitcoin was never about escaping the system. It was about participating in a new one, a system that belongs to everyone because no one controls it. Governments can enter. Institutions can enter. But they cannot reshape it. They can only join the same network you are already part of. And in that realization, the distance between power and the individual becomes smaller than it has ever been. So your 0.02 BTC is not just a holding. It is a position in a story that is now global. A story about responsibility, maturity, clarity, and choice. A story that continues to expand as more people, and now entire nations, step into the same space. Holding Bitcoin in this moment is not a prediction of the future. It is an alignment with it. A quiet statement of who you choose to be in a world that is rapidly remembering the value of independence. When governments begin buying Bitcoin, the story stops being just about markets. It becomes a conversation about what value means when it's no longer defined by a single authority. Bitcoin reminds us that stability can grow from transparency, and that freedom becomes real only when individuals choose to take responsibility for their piece of the system. In a world that shifts faster than ever, this clarity becomes a form of quiet strength. If this story helped you see the landscape differently, let it also remind you that the future isn't shaped only by institutions. It's shaped by people who pay attention, who learn early, who build conviction block by block. Your 0.02 BTC isn't small. It's a statement, a position in a world where individuals stand on the same foundation as nations. So here's the question. What role will you choose in this new chapter of global value? If this story helped you see the path more clearly, subscribe for more stories like this.